Hi, welcome back to my channel. I'm Michelle, and today I want to share with you my biggest fear as a homeschooler. So if you're new here, this was our first year homeschooling. We're just about to wrap up our year, and I have a 9 and 5-year-old and 2-year-old. I'm currently homeschooling my 9 and 5-year-old. So we did 3rd grade and kindergarten this year. And I thought it was important to make this video because I think talking about our fears and doubts while homeschooling is just as important as talking about what curriculum we're using and what's not working, to have that emotional connection as well and mental of how we're doing. So my biggest fear before starting homeschooling, and quite frankly during homeschooling, has been that I will fail my child. And what I mean by that is that I will not provide a good enough education to prepare them for their lives. And I think this is a very common fear to have, and I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing to have. I think when we care deeply about our children and their education that they receive, this happens naturally. So I really wanted to talk about why this particular fear or doubt is so important to me. Education to me is not just a stepping stone to the next thing. It's not just, worksheets and textbooks. To me, education truly has the ability to transform your life. It molds who you are going to be. And I think that's really important because, for example, in my education, I was in public school. I got a very basic education, and for that I'm thankful, but more into that, I grew up in circumstances where it was very a narrow-minded, closed-minded household, and even in the towns and cities I lived in, because we moved a lot when I was younger. So I've been through many different public school systems, many different towns and cities and things like that, big ones, small ones. But for me, no matter where we went, there always seemed to be this closed-mindedness, this idea that there's right and wrong and very black and white and there's no in between. And for me, that was also reflected very much in my education. We were definitely given a specific point of view. Mind you, I think we were given more perspective than something you would see in maybe a homeschooling environment, perhaps a private school environment. But it was still a restricted education by all means. And especially in high school, I remember we definitely didn't talk. Like, I took a specific history class and things like Vietnam, Civil War, and so much of that I think was glazed over, and I didn't realize that because why would I? I was a youth and I had no other prior experience to this. But as an adult now, I realized that much of my education was censored. And even in my home life, much of that was censored. Now, I wouldn't say we were conservative, but my family was more closed-minded and, to be completely honest, ignorant in a lot of things. And this is why I think education is so important. I grew up in places where there weren't diversity, where there weren't different groups of people. There was, for example, in high school, everybody was white, and the only religion that, besides not having any religion, was Christian. So I grew up in a predominantly white Christian environment. So I didn't have exposures to other cultures, other religions, other ethnic backgrounds. I had none of that. And that is why I think education, especially higher education, is so important. I think, yes, with lower elementary, high school, things like that, public school or homeschool, you can get this very watered down or one perspective of your education. So it wasn't until I went to college that I was, for the first time in my life, not only asked what I thought, because my education was very much just regurgitating things, facts, information, not really thinking for myself. So when I entered college, for the first time in my life, I was asked to think for myself. I was asked to make my own choices. But more than that, for the first time in my life, I was around people that weren't in my little bubble, that didn't all come from the same place and have the same views. And that was life-changing. And that is one of the reasons I think our education is so important, because it literally changed me. And I know that is scary for a lot of more conservative homeschoolers, that's what they want to avoid. They don't want exposure to other people, other cultures, other beliefs, because to them, you know, that's wrong. They don't want there's a right and a wrong. Again, that one-minded set that there's a right and a wrong and no gray area. So to me, the higher education was so important because I was exposed outside of my bubble. I was allowed to think for myself, meet people who were different than me, that thought different than me, and learn from each other. And it was so pivotal in my life that when I talk about education, that's what I think about. That's the power it has. I'm not talking about education just to change your economic well-being, getting, you know, a better job, paying well, all those things, but it literally has the ability to mold who you are. And more into that, I think the greatest weapon we have against ignorance is education. So when looking at my own child's education, that is why I take it so very seriously, and why I prefer to research endlessly and learn as much as I can, because I don't want them to grow up in a bubble that they see things only one way. And my greatest fear is in homeschooling that they would, I mean, we can show as many viewpoints as we want, but would they be getting enough? Would I be enough? So we have this weight on our backs of, you know, are we doing a good enough job? And one of the most difficult things I think about homeschooling is that you don't know, right? You don't have that instant, I'm doing a good job. It's one of those things you won't know probably until your child's much older, if you did it all right. But recently I did get a glimmer that perhaps I'm doing a good job. So my oldest and I, we were finishing up our medieval unit history, and it ends with the European colonization, and we were specifically talking about Native Americans and the spread of smallpox from the Europeans, and just from their perspective, how it would have felt when people invading your land and bringing disease and things like that. And my daughter started talking about how, well, perhaps the European colonists didn't know the damage they were doing or the damage they would be inflicting. And it almost came to the point where it seemed like she was defending the European colonists. And we had a good discussion about it, but later I was talking to my husband, I'm like, am I not presenting this correctly? Does she not understand the devastation that happened to the Native Americans? Am I not getting that point across? And my husband brought up a good point that she's doing exactly what I've taught her to do. I've taught her not to look at right and wrong, not to look at one individual side, but to look at a situation and try to see it from that person's perspective. So although I myself was looking at it as black and white, that the Europeans did these horrible things to the Native Americans, which has some truth to it, but I wasn't looking at it from the Europeans' point of view, the European colonist point of view. And she was. She was trying to understand the choices they made based on what was going on and, you know, their values and beliefs. And I think that's amazing. I think many adults can't do that. And my 9-year-old was already trying to see both sides, not to judge which side is right and which side is wrong, but to be able to see both sides and where they're coming from. So that was my little glimmer that I know I'm doing it right, that important thing, that education that I want for her is happening, and it's molding her into the person that she's meant to be. And that's the point of education. So I just want to share with you, if you are one of those people that is too struggling with the fear, am I doing enough? Am I good enough for this? Yes, the answer is yes. And we won't always see, like I said, the instant rewards of it. But every now and then you'll get a glimmer of your child's character coming through. And it makes it all worthwhile, even through the tears and the yelling and the frustration. It's worth it. So thank you for watching.